my friends, welcome back to the Weekend Interview Show. Our next guest is Brian Doherty. He's the senior editor of Reason magazine, for which he's written since 1994. He's the author of the incredible book, This is Burning Man, and is working on a project that I want to know all about, Radicals for Capitalism. Welcome to the show, Brian.
Thanks for having me, Scott.
Well, before we get into your article that you wrote for Reason about the Real ID, I want to know all about Radicals for Capitalism. What's that about?
Sure. It's a book I've been working on for an embarrassingly long time, but I'm definitely finishing it this year, and it will be published probably in fall 2006 by the Public Affairs imprint. It is the first narrative history of the ideas and institutions behind American libertarianism, which has been either mostly ignored by American cultural and political historians or alternately sort of treated like a stepchild of the conservative movement, which I will posit is not really the accurate way to look at it, which is why I am making sure that I use the word radicals in the title. I'm trying to reclaim the libertarian tradition, which I will also posit is the original American political tradition rooted in our founding, as a radical attack on state power and on status over contract, as they say, throughout American history. It will mostly be focused on the thinkers who are identifiably have called themselves libertarian in the post-war era. Of course, with any ideological tendency, you could trace it back as far as you cared to. A lot of libertarians trace libertarian notions all the way back to Lao Tzu and certain elements of the Bible. I'll touch on that stuff, but I can't write a 2,000-page book, though I would like to. So the main narrative focus of the book is going to start during World War II, when sort of the set of ideas that define libertarianism in its modern sense began to coalesce with works by people like Ayn Rand, Rose Wilder Lane, Isabel Patterson, some of Friedrich Hayek's major works, the founding of the Foundation for Economic Education, the first recognizably libertarian educational institution, or what are sometimes known as think tanks, which nowadays publishes the Freeman magazine, and kind of moving on from there.
Well, and the World War II era is really kind of the interesting place to start here. It seems like with Roosevelt, you had a lot of people who had considered themselves liberals. They were traditionally leftist people, but they were for laissez-faire and against foreign interventionism, and they sort of found themselves on the right, even though they had their whole life long sort of considered themselves leftists.
They found themselves on the right, that's correct, and then very rapidly by the mid-50s they found themselves almost entirely squeezed out of respectable political opinion in America entirely. That decade after World War II, the beginnings of the Cold War, the beginnings of the national security state, really saw the split between the more radically libertarian tendencies in what used to be known as the American right and what has come to be the conservative movement nowadays, which these are all simplifications, of course, especially as we're just talking here, but you could roughly blame that on Bill Buckley and the National Review, founded in 1955, and their obsession with fighting communism at all costs, and they certainly let the anti-state element of what used to define the right and the anti-war elements be pushed way to the back of the bus in the name of fighting worldwide communism at any cost. And they sort of transferred that same mentality to fighting worldwide Islamism, or jihadism, as they call it, at any cost nowadays.
It's interesting to me that you say that libertarianism, what we call now libertarianism, is really sort of the founding principle of America in the first place, that classical liberalism and paleoconservatism really all focus on the right of the individual and the ideas of our Declaration of Independence, no?
Absolutely, yeah. I'm going to attempt to reclaim not only libertarians' radicalism, but libertarians' true blue Americanism, and of course all of these arguments can get very complicated, and I will go into them in much greater depth in the book. But I definitely think you can rescue a rather purist libertarian attitude toward the role of the state in the actions of our founding fathers and the construction of our late lamented lamented, long-forgotten Constitution, in case anyone remembers that. It supposedly went into effect in 1789, and it slowly has dribbled away from our conscious ever since.
Well, I really can't wait to read the book. We'll all keep an eye open for Radicals for Capitalism. That sounds like a great read. I actually read an interview that you did of Lew Rockwell one time. That was just
right. That
interview
was done as part of my research for the book, and Lew has put the transcript of it online in various places. I so far conducted maybe nearly 100 of those kinds of interviews. I'm hoping to conduct about another 100 more as I wrap up the book over the next year. I really think this is going to pull together the stories of the true, relentless and uncompromising fighters for American liberty of the type that you don't see so much on the so-called conservative movement nowadays.
All right. Well, that's all very interesting. But the real reason that I brought you on the show today, Brian, was to talk about H.R. 418, the Real ID Act.
Yes,
by the House.
Another example of how our elected representatives have forgotten that we have a constitution in this country. The Real ID Act. My goodness. I hope your listeners have been keeping an eye on this. Of course, it hasn't gotten a great deal of mainstream press attention, and the attention it's gotten hasn't really stressed the importance of this. It essentially federalizes the driver's license function. And of course, for years, the state-issued driver's license has functioned as a de facto, if not de jure, national ID card. It's sort of the basic gold standard in proving you are who you are. And encased in this bill that's mainly aimed at immigrants. And I think that's an important point because a lot of people don't realize or stress the connections between what they see as a legitimate defense of America's borders or America's citizenship rights, and how attempting to do that leads to sort of tightening the vice grip on everyone in America. And I think anti-immigration people need to think about that, because in the name of keeping our eye on illegal immigrants, the federal government is now, insisting isn't really the right word, because they're kind of using the power of the purse in this. They are not literally ordering the states to do these things in H.R. 418, but they are saying that any state that does not start doing what they command, their driver's license will no longer be considered a valid ID by the federal government. And, of course, since 1996, the most important function, I guess, to most of us of the ID on the federal level is you need it to get on an airplane. So any state that does not give in to the demands of H.R. 418 will find its citizens essentially internal exiles in the United States, unable to travel out of the state by any means other than car. And I wouldn't even put too much faith in that you'll be able to travel unmolested across state borders by car anymore. And,
or even inside your own state.
Yeah. You're right. Yeah, of course. Yeah, lots of flights are intra-state as well. And some of the things that they are demanding, that the feds will be demanding of the states with H.R. 418. And let me stress, by the way, that the House has passed this bill. The Senate has not yet passed it, so it is not yet, thank goodness, the law of the land. But it did pass the House last week. All driver's licenses will be required to have machine-readable biometric IDs of a sort to be determined later by the head of Homeland Security.
This is a bit confusing to me, because I know here in Texas, I know it's been since the 1990s, we have to get our thumbs digitally scanned.
Yeah, many states already do this.
Right.
Many states already do this.
Was that not a federal mandate from before? We're just ahead of the game here in Texas?
Yeah, you're ahead of the game. Every state has not been doing that. They've not had to do it.
I really appreciate your point there about the immigration that you brought up. That when people go around complaining not about what the state does, but what it's not doing well enough, protect us from the illegal immigrants, and government turns to us and says, okay, here's your national ID card.
Right.
And so people who... In fact, it's generally people who are on the hardcore right, who are distrustful of imperial foreign policy and, are very jealous of their liberties. They're the first ones to demand that government do something about the immigration problem.
Mm-hmm. Another interesting detail of this bill, which I learned about from some statements by Representative Ron Paul, is it will require all of the information that every state has on all of its driver's license holders to be contained in a readable database by all the other states. And according to Representative Paul, because of a compact we've already made with the Canadian and Mexican governments, that the Canadian and Mexican governments will also have access to every bit of this data, which, I mean, anyone who understands the nature of the government workers who have their hands on this, whether in the U.S., Canada, or Mexico, will understand that it's a extremely unsafe thing to have all of this data available to, you know, any government clerk who works for a DMV associated bureau in any of these countries. It seems to me to be an absolute machine for the construction of fake IDs, if anyone were interested in doing so in any of those countries.
It's interesting that the state whose job it is supposedly to protect our rights, including our privacy, they're really the biggest threat. They're the ones who have all the information about us that we really need to worry about, right?
Sure, yeah. I mean, it may bother you, you know, to have a private business send you, you know, targeted junk mail or targeted email based on their knowledge that you bought a certain dog food with your, you know, Super Saver card at a supermarket. That's kind of annoying, but your supermarket doesn't have the power to restrict your ability to join certain organizations or give money to certain organizations that it's decided are terrorists. It doesn't have the power to arrest you. It doesn't have the power, you know, there's lots of things the government can do to you that your local supermarket can't. So I think we should all be far more concerned with the government's access to our personal data as opposed to calling on them to protect us from private uses of personal data.
Yeah, but Mr. Doherty, I'm still not sure I see the real problem here. I mean, we just need to take a look at your papers, and then you're free to go.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's funny, and a lot of people do say that, and at a certain point, I don't know what to tell them. If their sense of liberty and dignity does not include the ability to move about in their own homeland without having to prove anything about who they are until they're accused from probable cause of a crime, if that doesn't bother them, you know, I don't know what to tell them. I'm sorry I live in the same country as them, and I'm especially sorry if they vote. But lots of us do care about it, so I think it's my job to point out the implications of what bills like this mean, because they pass with very little fanfare. And from my general understanding of congressmen and their staffs, they probably pass even without most of the men who voted for it really thinking too hard about what it means, if they've even read it, you know. There's a lot of ignorance and apathy that feeds into these things, and I just hope that the more we spread the word about these things publicly, that takes care of the ignorance, and hopefully it will eventually take care of the apathy as well. My favorite detail about this bill, by the way, which isn't directly related to the Real ID part, is the Department of Homeland Security has been trying to build these new barriers down at the Mexico-California border. And the building of the barriers has interfered with some land that environmentalists are concerned with for reasons that I frankly don't even remember right now. But at any rate, the environmentalists are upset that this barrier is being built, and there are certain existing environmental laws that require the Department of Homeland Security to you know, do environmental impact reports and the like, whatever. And this has bothered DHS. So written into this bill, H.R. 418, is language that basically states that any existing law that interferes with the Department of Homeland Security's desire to build barriers is absolutely null and void. At the sole discretion of the head of Homeland Security, not even an elected official, he can override any law that might interfere with his ability to build these barriers, and that there is no judicial review or judicial relief possible. So it's written into a law giving dictatorial powers to a non-elected official. And I really don't want to believe that a majority of the members of Congress, and it's split along party lines. You know, this is also an interesting point for people concerned with Republican versus Democrat divides. The Democrats ended up being better on this bill, not, I think, because they were more cognizant of it or more, you know, concerned with our liberty or our privacy, but because it was a bill that a Republican administration wanted. So most of the Republicans voted for it. most of the Democrats didn't. But I guarantee you it would have split the other way if it had been a Kerry administration asking for this bill, which a Kerry administration almost certainly would have.
Right. And it's interesting that the Republicans, the party of small government, low taxes, and constitutional federalism, they don't mind that, 3.5 years from now, Hillary Clinton or worse will be elected and will have this very same dictatorial authority that they pass now.
Yeah, no. They're not thinking very far ahead, and I think in most cases they're just not thinking at all. And, I say that because I'm trying to be charitable. I would like to believe that these people are not as evil as their behavior would have to lead me to believe they are. I'd prefer to believe that they're merely ignorant and apathetic.
Oh, well, that's an optimistic way to look at it.
I'm just trying to be nice,
So, listen, looking ahead here into the future, we're at a crossroads sort of here in our society about to what degree are we going to allow technology to just completely rule our life. And I'm trying to think of this argument more now in terms, absent the state's influence. But just the idea, have you ever read or heard of the book Technopoly by Neil Postman?
Yeah, I know of Postman's book. I haven't actually read it. Another interesting book, I think along the lines that you're getting at, is David Brin's Transparent Society.
Where the argument is basically, listen, there's nothing we can do to stop it. If they can invent a camera cheap enough to put on every street corner, they're going to put it on every street corner. If they can invent a chip small enough to put in your hand, they will. Right.
I think there is a great deal of validity to that notion, and the David Brin book takes that idea and tries to give it an optimistic spin, which is that, okay, we can't have privacy anymore, he says. Just the technological imperative dictates that we're going to live in a fishbowl of a society, and then the best thing we can do about it is make sure that the eyes and the flow of information are not just coming from us to them, that is from the citizens to the power brokers, but that the citizens also have the same access and eye on power. And sort of the paradigmatic example of that in the video camera age was the Rodney King of video. It's like if citizens have their eyes on the cops, on the government, hopefully we can at least somewhat mitigate, if not completely cure, the problems that come from their technological eye on us.
Sort of the way that our limited constitutional republic was invented in an era where the people were just as well armed as their government. All right, so Weekend Interview Show, we're talking with Brian Doherty from Reason Magazine. We'll be right back. My friends, welcome back to the Weekend Interview Show. I'm talking with Brian Doherty. He's the senior editor of Reason Magazine. He writes some really great articles for them, including The Beast is Back, Real ID for an All-Too-Real World, which is in Reason from, I guess, this week or whatever.
Yeah, it appeared on the website, I think on Wednesday. It should still be up on the front page at Reason.com.
There you go. The date on it is January 16th, 2005. And by the way, folks, if anybody wants to check out the archives of any of the previous interviews, including this interview in its entirety within a day or two, go to weekendinterviewshow.com. I keep all the archives there. And if anybody wants to contact me, send me some email, pro or con, it's scott@weekendinterviewshow.com is my email address. Now, Brian, the thing is here about all this technology and all this increase of state power and centralization of state police power, it all seems to coincide with foreign policy. Someone once asked me long ago, but how could the American government ever really take away the people's freedom? That's impossible. This is America. We'd never stand for that. And my answer simply was, well, they'll have us involved in a foreign conflict at the same time. Yeah. And apparently that really works well.
Yeah, it's working so far, and an incredible lack of public discussion of these things. I mean, I don't read every single bit of the big mainstream media, but I must say I've noticed very little discussion of Real ID at a time when citizens could still do something about it. Because, like I stressed, it's only passed the House so far; it's not passed the Senate. I imagine after Bush signs it into law, maybe the New York Times will write a alarmed, news analysis about it.
Right.
When it's, oh my God, what's happened here? Well,
Has Bush said that he would sign it?
What's that?
Has Bush said that he would sign it?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. He's very firmly for this bill. In fact, someone, what his press guy, whose name I'm blissfully not
Scott
remembering, was asked about it, and he absolutely said Bush supports H.R. 418.
Very nice. And, you also write in your article that they're working on passing a new biometric Social Security card that says right on it, this is not a national ID.
Yeah.
I thought that was the funniest thing I've ever heard. When they first invented the Social Security system in the 30s, it said not for identification purposes right on it, and it's been used as a national ID ever since anyway.
Absolutely, yeah. You only can't really get a job without it. That's, it's not really essential.
Yeah, you just have it or starve.
Right.
No big deal.
Yeah.
Yeah, just like you say in your article, this isn't really a national ID. It's just that if your state doesn't pass a law setting it up this way, you'll be an unperson from now on. So it's not really a mandate. It's just strong encouragement, right?
Nope. And this is, again, this is our federalism president is certainly behind this. Well,
and also you look at the news in the last week, or last few weeks, we've got Alberto Gonzales, Mr. Torture Memo, is the Attorney General. We've got Chertoff, Mr. Round 'em Up and Ask Questions Later, as the Director of Homeland Security. And now John Negroponte, the guy in charge of the Contra death squads in the 80s down there in Honduras and Nicaragua, is going to be the National Intelligence Director. Yes. It's like a barrel of monkeys up there.
Absolutely. And to be even more alarmist about the ID issue, sometimes we can count on the courts to rein in Congress and the president, but on the ID issue, the courts have been uniformly terrible. I've written about these issues as well. A rich eccentric named John Gilmore is currently suing the Department of Justice over airline ID requirements. He lost on the district court level, and he's appealing now. He's not out to win. And, of course, also last year, the Supreme Court told Mr. Dudley Hibble of Nevada that any time a police officer asks him to identify himself, he has to do it.
Yeah, you're free to go as soon as we're done looking at your papers. All right, thank you very much. Brian Doherty writes for Reason Magazine. Everybody look him up. Thanks, Brian. And we'll be back next week with the Weekend Interview Show.